Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you today to another episode of our Kathy's Corner. This wonderful series is the cornerstone of Project Kin and really comes to that one thing so many of us have in common in terms of what we've acquired from our ancestors in the box of stuff, the documents, photographs, artifacts, and mementos that family have passed on. And we look at those and know that somebody out there knows better how to deal with all this stuff, but we're not sure. Maybe this, maybe that. So we include this series as an important part of our programming and are delighted to welcome you to today's program with our speaker, Kathy Stone. Kathy comes to us as a long-time experienced photo manager, now applying that skill set and expertise to her own work. So with that, over to you, Kathy.
Thanks, Barbara. So, okay, first thing Kathy needs to do is, oh, my phone isn't even in here. I was going to say I've got it put on Do Not Disturb, but my phone is somewhere else, so I don't need to do that. Okay, we won't even worry about that. So welcome again to Kathy's Corner, and we're exploring our mystery photos part 3, and this has been a series we've been doing on trying to figure out the who, what, where, when, why in that pile of photos that we set aside and called our mystery photos, or the photos that when we're sorting our collection, we don't quite know what to do with. And again, my caveat here is don't throw them away because you don't know who they are, because you may find out down the road who they are as you gather more information. So this is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go back a little bit. So the exciting part is in the last two, part 1 and part 2, we talked about the media itself, what we can learn from the type of photo, the type of slide, the type of film, all those things. And now we're going to actually look at the pictures this time instead of just looking at the backs of them or the design of them. But before we start, I just wanted to back up. Barbara mentioned at the very end of her presentation, or sorry, at the very end of Kathy's Corner last week, that she mentioned she had a lantern slide, and I realized we didn't even talk about what those were, and if you're lucky enough to have one. So I thought I'd just do a little short thing on what a lantern slide is, and these are just some examples. So they turned up around in the 17th century, and they were using hand-painted images on glass, was how they started. They had a projector, such as the top corner there, where you projected the slide, and they were commonly used to add something to presentations or things that when people were talking about something, they would use this lantern slide for it. So they were painted on glass. They were very common in the late 1900s and early 20th century and used for a variety of purposes, including illustrated lectures and showcasing destinations. They were particularly popular to speakers on the lecture circuit to illustrate their presentation and as a home entertainment. They peaked in around the 1900s and were widely used up until around the 1930s, gradually declined in popularity as they were replaced by 35 millimeter slides and other visual technologies. They are still a fascinating part of history, offering a glimpse into culture of the past. And so that's what a lantern slide is. Now I'm going to go back to me. And I just thought sorry. Oh, there, Barbara just left on me. She had to go get the picture off the wall. Hi, Bill. Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us. So, Barb, is this the
Let's see what you can see. Oh, there it is.
Is that the picnic photo?
Yeah. No, this is another one.
Oh,
that is. Let's see if it doesn't see. There it goes. There it is. That is from an original that is a glass slide.
Oh, okay, there you go. So that's an original made from a glass slide. So they could be made into photographs as well. So I thought we'd kick off today because we're going to look at what's inside the photo with an example that Barbara used a lot in Ponga in the old days called the Harger family photo. And so I'm going to turn it over to Barbara to share that photo or tell the story about it. And that way we're going to get a good introduction to what we're going to talk about today. You're muted, Barbara.
Please. I upgraded my system, so everything has to have permissions. My
Oh,
day.
technology is so much fun.
Yes, indeed. Well, I do this to make sure that everybody knows the feeling. Okay, so allow me to share. There we go. There. I will even do you the favor of hiding that. So this is the photo, right?
Yep.
This is a photo that my mother passed to me, not knowing very much about it. She was in the early stages of dementia at the time, and she could tell me that I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but this is my grandmother in the center. And I slowly kept going around and around who everybody is. In our family, we often call her out because she looks different, the dark hair. This is my dear great aunt. It's actually her sister, Dorothy. And it was really a journey of exploration in figuring out who people were, what they were doing, when it was. And I've used this as an example many times. Over to you, Kathy.
Okay, and we can maybe come back to some of the things, the clues you found to identify the times and everything. So, okay, so that's one of Barbara's famous photos that we used, and so it's working. So we're going to talk about exploring our mystery photos, and this is one of my photos. And for those of you who tuned into our little chat on Sunday. This is a classic example from my grandparents' house with the budgie poop on it. That's what all the little black dots are all over the frame of the photo. So it's kind of hard to get many details off the frame, but that's some of it. So this is one of my family photos, and I can't even start this session without mentioning Maureen Taylor, the photo detective, because a lot of what I've learned about identifying things in photos has come from the work Maureen Taylor does. And so I think Barbara can pop that link into the chat for Maureen's website and her books. Sure. She has quite a few books written on that. And I've looked today, I noticed she has ebooks. So those of you who don't want more hardcover books. So, but on her website, she opens up with how does she detect the things in a photo. And I wanted to use her words. She said, I start by studying clues within a picture, a hairstyle, a sign in the background, the shape of a shirt sleeve, in order to identify a person, place, or era. What follows from my genealogical expertise is uncovering the story behind the images of the past. That could mean shedding light on how those fixtures fit into your family tale, or discovering the history in the area which those people lived, even if that's locally in her small state of Rhode Island or around the world in Australia. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to come back to this photo at the end, and we can talk about some of the clues we used in that photo. So the young woman on the far right is my grandmother. And this is obviously from England. This is her siblings and her mother and father. And so that's we've now identified, I think, everybody in the photo, which is quite good. So, but we'll come back to that picture later when we start talking about some of the different clues we can look for in pictures. And so the process, there's a couple things that are helpful to do ahead of time, and that is to first gather all the information that you know first. And so you may have found a bunch of information. So I'm looking at you on my Zoom screen is over there. I'm looking at you because I like to look at your faces when I'm talking. So I'll move you over here. Gather the information that you know, and it may be the stuff we found out when we were looking at the era of a photo, when we were identifying carte de visite or camera cards, cabinet cards, or what we found out from the photographer for location. So gather all that information up, the age of the children in a family, the location, and other details that you may have picked up or that what you know already to start with. And then create a timeline and a family tree. I distinguish between the two of them. So the big picture of white stuff on the wall, it actually, you can't see the whole thing. It keeps going further to the right, and it goes all around in this room down the entrance to the room. There's another 2 walls of it with these big sheets of paper on them. And what that is dates and things written beside the date. So we just started off with, because as I was organizing this big collection, this wasn't my family collection, but a client. And as we started going through all the photos and the mess, and it was kind of a mess. I've shared pictures of that before. We'll do that another time, sometime, about what a real mess looks like in photos, in things that have been passed on, and nobody's ever really done anything with them other than to save them. So every time we came across a detail from a date in something, be it written on the back of a picture, written in a note we found, in a letter we found, in the massive amounts of obituaries we found, which are kind of almost one of my favorite things for finding information, are obituaries. Not just the birthday, the obvious date of death and birth of the person who the obituary is for, but also in terms of figuring out who siblings are, and other people that might be, and quite sometimes there's ages. And so figuring out other family members just from an obituary. So one of my favorite things. So we used that and other things. People at various points in history, people had written some family history down. So that all went on the walls, so that as I was sorting through pictures, I could just look up and not have to go, oh, wait, where I remember they had this house in northern Texas. What date was that? Because this is that house. And so timelines, I think, are just a wonderful, absolutely wonderful thing for keeping track of, trying to figure out dates. Other things that we put on there: locations, jobs, vacations. And I have vacations and big vacations, like massive vacations and trips versus just little regular trips. And of course, a family tree. I got to move this over here, there, because I got to look at that. So I just downloaded this family tree. There's loads available. The ones we used did not look like this. They were written on those are the 11 by 14-inch sheets of paper, usually for copiers, large size paper. But it just gave a lot of room to write big so we could read it. And the family tree is on a similar type of document. But it's just somewhere where you record all that information, so that when you have to, when you're trying to figure out a photo, you're not digging through piles of documents or trying to go back and go, where did I see that? It just makes a neat thing. And we're using the timeline now as we put the photos all in order and add this information. All the information on the timeline will be added to the family history, because it's a really good resource too. So that's the process. Start with what you know and create a timeline. And then we start looking at, I've got to go. I didn't know I had a slide for this. So here's some tips of things to look at. And I saw some of these in Barbara's photo too. Names and ages, I think we have that. Vacations, holiday properties. If your family had in my family, I have a cousin, they have a cabin that's been in their family for many, many years. And so lots of trips are from the cabin. So that's a good thing to note, that there was this cabin, and that's the first place to look. If you've got lake pictures, might be that lake. Pets, special traditions, things like glasses, braces, and hairstyles. So I know when I can look up when I got my glasses. So when I first appear in photos with glasses, that'll give me a time frame. I know what times I had braces, so that narrows the time frame down, but can be useful when you're looking at other people photos that you're not that familiar with. I like to keep a timeline of grades and school information, because, as we know, grades start in September, at least here, hopefully everywhere now that I say this. In Canada, they start in September and they end in June. And so it overlaps 2 years. So grade 1 might be in both 1994 and 1995. So to keep that information is good just to have in the back of your head when you're looking at, and for us, school photos are always taken in September. So I know that if I've got the school photo, and they're easy to tell, they're in September. Hobbies, sports, anything else that people are involved in, or just details that can help identify pictures. Now this picture, this is my grandmother and grandfather and my aunt and uncle. And this they immigrated from England in 1929. And just looking at the location in the back of that picture, pretty sure that's not England. I'm pretty sure that that is actually Canada and most likely Lake Vermilion, because that's the area they immigrated to. So that gives me a starting point. And also I can look at the age of the kids in the photo, knowing how old my uncle and aunt were when they came here. And we could look again later on, we'll talk about fashion too. We could look in more detail at the fashion. Google Lens probably not going to give me a lot of information about that location because it's pretty generic, but you never know. So looking at the photos themselves again. And so the original metadata was always writing on the back of photos. And so the information here is Grammy, which is my grandmother, and she's in front of the oldest house in Canada, in Quebec City. So I could Google now that information from that note. It doesn't say um, what the house is or any details, but I could find more information about where that picture was taken from that information. And then someone identified the people in this picture who are this is my Hodgson. So this is my grandfather's family. He isn't in the picture, but his father and mother are there, and some of his relatives. This was a wedding, apparently, of the two people sitting in the front, who was one of my um, great aunts was the bride. So you can find more details from that, and we'll look a little later on, but look for that information written on photos. And then like the next thing we're going to look at here, the next thing is dates on photos. And both of these things have to be taken with a grain of salt, because developing dates aren't necessarily, like, we have to keep in our mind that they're not the dates that the picture was taken, not like our modern photos and things. So on this photo, we're looking at it, it says June of 1960. I'm looking at the one on the left with that lovely decal edge. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at who was a baby in that time frame around June. And that's me. And I was born in April. So I know that that is most likely me, because there's nobody else with a birthday that would be on a film developed in June. So that gives me the idea that I guess that's me. I could look now and say, darn, that looks like one of my sons, and guess it was me. So, but looking at this just pile of baby photos, that gives me a clue, because a lot of these photos I never saw until I was an adult. So it's like, I'm not sure. My mom is gone. All my aunts and uncles are gone. So mom could have immediately said, that's you. And then the next one is dated December of 1960. So this is another thing we could look at, when it comes to seasons. And it's another thing that it depends on where you live and where you think the picture might have been taken, whether there are seasons. And I got trapped in that with my client because I started off and going, well, this is all summer. And then the family member that was working with me went, they lived in Texas. It's summer all the time. I went, okay, good point. But I know this is not December in Canada. And I know the one person is my aunt. So again, I'm going to guess that this is a picture of me taken in December, because nobody else was that young. We could start, if we were looking harder and lacking information, we could look at the car in the background, but there's not a whole lot of car on that one. So we look at dates, we look at what's written on the photos, but we need to take a bit of it for granted, because it's not precise. And also we're trusting that whoever wrote on the back of the photo knew what they were, was accurate what they wrote, because we had a family member went through and wrote a bunch of stuff on the back of photos that was what she thought were in the photos. So I see there's chat, Barbara. I'm hoping you're managing that and you're going to interrupt me if we need to.
I would. We're good.
Okay, we're good. So dates can be helpful sometimes, but you have to do a little detective work around where that might be. And this is a big one where we draw information from Maureen Taylor has done a lot of work on hairstyles and fashion. And so here are some pictures from different eras. And looking first at the hairstyles, the hairstyles could give us a lot of information. And if I didn't send this link to Barbara today, I've got a link that leads to eras and the different fashions. And so we can tell by the different hairstyles. So the one on the far left is obviously an older picture. It's one of my aunts and her daughters. Great aunts, not an aunt, great aunt and her daughters. The one in the middle is my mom and a friend of hers from the late 50s. So now, again, different hairstyle. The top on the right with that is another different hairstyle. So again, we're going to guess this is the early 60s because that again is me, because now that's my mom and most likely that's me she's holding. And I'm wearing pink. The baby's wearing pink. So that would be a good clue too that it wasn't one of her nephews, that it's me. So we're looking at all that. And then on the bottom corner, guess the decade for that one with the hair. You've got to look more at me in the middle probably and my cousin, but
70s.
give a shot at the decade.
70s.
Late 70s, yes. So that would be that the hairstyle and the glasses too. Those would have been not sunglasses I was wearing, but my regular glasses. So we get a lot out of pictures from hairstyle and fashion, and particularly old pictures. And so we could look up that style of hat in the picture on the far left. We could look up when that style of hat was popular because it's sort of distinctive. My mother's polka dot coat, similar, probably could get a range of dates. You're not going to get the day out of that, but a range of dates. So hairstyles and fashion are two big ones. And again, we have some more. There's I think I already showed that picture, but anyway, that's in that picture that we looked at before. We can look at, there's a lot of different, I'm talking the top left there. We can look at the type of suits the men were wearing. We can look at the shoes for the show up quite well. The hats again, lots of things in that photo can be used to help us determine the era of that photo. And then another good example. This is my adoptive grandmother. Yes, she's my adoptive father's mother. And so this one, I'm going to guess this is the roaring. Looks to me like maybe the Roaring Twenties, and that would be fit about right with the time frame. But we could do more by checking out again distinctive hat, the hairstyle with the little pin curls. All these things can give us clues as to to put an approximate date on a photo. Any questions, comments?
Kathy, you referenced a site covering fashion timeline, and I found one from the Fashion Institute of New York that I've posted to the channel. I think that's a useful one, but there may be others that we can include in the notes.
I'll make sure like you get the ones I have after we're done, so you can post them with the recording.
As a matter of fact, this was an area that at Ponga we gave some thought to and had some initial development actually around using AI to go in and detect clothing, in particular clothing and cars and technology around the photo to be able to put a date to it. It was frighteningly good even at early development. And I know this is something that MyHeritage has since released. AI is just really good at that kind of thing. So yeah, it's not perfect, of course, but
yeah, and that's what we're looking at. None of these are going to give, that isn't going to tell me what day that picture was taken. It's the that's the original, but it was I guess, and it would have been a cabinet frame on it. That picture would have had a frame, and it's been removed at some point along the way, and all I have is the picture itself left. But again, AI, I think will, as we develop AI and it gets better, we're going to have a lot of help from using AI for different information. Cars and license plates. Barbara had a photo. That was how we connected along many, many years ago, was over a photo she posted about a car and looking up the types of the license plates. And that can be a big help in finding out what the photos are. So this picture, you could look up for old cars and try and match that type of car. in the photo, but if you look at there on the license plate, and you can just barely see that it's a North Carolina license plate. It's kind of hidden a bit by one of the lamps, but then you can look and Google license plates. I was trying to find, I put one reference in there for cars and license plates, but license plates is a little bit a deeper dive, because you've got to, most of the sites seem to be, you can't just put a license, maybe with AI you can, I'll have to try that now. You can't just put in, I want to see old license plates. You usually go by state or province or country and then get a time frame. But for this one, that's that same style of North Carolina. This one was from 1918, gives a pretty good time frame for when that photo was taken. And again, if we blew up that picture, there's people in that car that we could then add that could help us with the identification. So, and this is actually, the plate was found on eBay. So there's all sorts of places where somebody's trying to sell this license plate, which might not be what we're trying to do, but it's somewhere to start and gets good for information. Okay, this slide is out of place, but I'll go through it anyway. So here's a bunch of, I don't know why it flopped there, but ideas of different things that you can look for different details in pictures. And so, and sometimes you can figure out the time frame by by something in the photo. So on the top left, written on the back of that, is Stratford on Avon in England, because that was from our trip to England. And we could look at for pictures of that particular building and see if we can find a similar date and time frame where the building looked like that. And I think that was, those of you who were in the first session and listened to Hazel Thornton tell about her picture, her photo detective picture, that was in fact what she was doing, is looking through the photos and looking for details in the background. The picture on the bottom, so there's got a number of things. So we can look at this picture. Sorry, I got to quit moving my mouse around. That's me with long hair now. And that's my dog, the black one that doesn't show up well in pictures. And she's got 3 puppies. You can't see the one black puppy because I'm wearing black pants. So we're planning on the photo. This is we're gonna guess again from the 70s, and we could look up the fashion of that shirt I'm wearing, and I bet it's in the 70s. And I know that we're in front of our house, so I recognize the house. So I can know what time frame this is just by the house, for the years we lived in the house, and then start narrowing down from there. And so also I never know, and this is where you got to look at photos and look at the details. I've never noticed before in this photo, in the background is our car, which was a Rambler. And so I could find out more information about the car now because I've actually got a picture of it in the back. Now, you're probably curious about the other picture on the page and why we would be dressed like this. So do not use the clothing as to pick the time frame for this. So I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, and it used to have a festival called Klondike Days, because Edmonton was known as the gateway to the Klondike during the gold rush. I almost said oil rush, gold rush. And so the festival, everybody got all dressed up in these. My mom would have made all those dresses for us, and everybody got dressed up like this. So I know that was Klondike Days, so I can look up a number of things. That's our house. I can see part of the address on there, so I know what years we lived at that house. I can look up when Klondike Days was, the time frame that we had that festival, and again, and 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 look at how upset my cousin is. But I know how old I am and how old my cousin is, so I could also guess a date from approximately guessing I'm guessing that the frowning child looks to be about 4 or 5. And I also know we moved into that house when I was 6 years old. So that's another clue that I'm 6 or more in that picture. I'm in the yellow, because I know from looking back at known factors and trying to figure out what year this picture was. So that's just some of the details in the backgrounds, which was going to be later, but I thought I moved the slide, but I didn't. Things in locations too. And again, we talked about using Google Lens to locate to locations, but other things that we can look at in the photos is by what's there and what isn't there. And so on the top left, we have a picture of New York City. And we know that picture was taken before 9/11 because the towers are there. The picture underneath that is San Francisco, and I didn't have time to pull up a current picture, but what we could do is look at what does this view look like now, and get an idea of what buildings might be, what new buildings are there. Barbara has a comment on my San Francisco.
Salesforce Tower is missing.
Which is?
Salesforce Tower. It's
Okay.
a monstrosity right in the middle that's not there, and the Transamerica Pyramid is distinctly there. And
Yes.
yeah, it's
So from those two things, from what's not there and what is there, we could get a
about
date, a time
2000s.
frame
Yeah.
for
Early
that.
2000s, but no later than like 2005 or something like that.
And then on the top one is what is left of Expo 1967 in Montreal. And I know that because I was there. But again, if I could use Google Lens on that photo, and it would probably give me that idea that it's on the Ile de Montréal, or the Montreal Island is where that is. Another way we can look at old pictures and look for clues. So this is obviously, for those of you, you know what that is if you're in the UK, that is um, Big Ben, and Big Ben is covered in scaffolding. And so this is a friend's photo, Kathy Robinson photo. And so you can Google when was the restoration done on Big Ben within the time frame you're looking at for the trip. Like, when would it have been covered in scaffolding? And that's another clue in looking at different pictures of photos in it. And in the one on the top, I'm sure if we looked closer at it or blew it up, we have some kind of a name on this building, and also there's a sign there that we can get information out of too. So lots of things in location photos, and you might go, well, why would I care that photo? But it will help you if you have pictures from in that time frame, like in that San Francisco time frame. I have a bunch of pictures of people and stuff when we were there. Helps me determine the time frame if I'm not sure, which I'm not totally sure. Um, this is a good one. So this is on the left is Edmonton International Airport, what it looked like when I worked there many, many years ago. And then on the right is what the new Edmonton International Airport looks like. And again, much like you said, Barbara, in the San Francisco one, there's a building missing. And so in here is the new office and control tower. You can still see the old control tower building in the background, but there's many things I can look at in that photo to get an idea. I can Google, when was this new terminal built? And I did that on Wikipedia, and I found out the details. I can also look at the airline WestJet there and figure out when did WestJet start, because WestJet is a newer airline and didn't exist when I worked at the airport, so I can get another date clue from that. I could probably zoom in on some of the cars in the old photo, would give me another idea of the time frame too, by looking at the cars. So you can, so it's a matter of looking at different details in the picture, and a lot of times backgrounds and other clues to help us get a better date on a photo that we're trying to put a date to. Advertising and signs. So this is a picture that was in one of my clients' collections that I'm using with permission. And so you can see her standing in front of that truck. The bulk of the truck is cut off, or we could use the truck as for information, but you can see that's big chunk of the sign with the woman and the walk a mile for a camel. And so I Googled and found the date and time frame that advertising poster was used. And so that allowed me to put an approximate date to that photo, which we really had no idea. Again, we could look at her clothes too. So I'm thinking it's about the 50s, maybe not quite that new. But again, we've got clothes and hat, but also sometimes some clues are easier to look up than others. So another example of signs and advertising. And here's another example where somebody had a picture of this farm supply place and was looking at the gas pumps in the background, and then did some little Google work and found something on Pinterest that showed the same very similar Gulf Crest pump, giving an idea, and that was 1957. So we get a date for when that picture might have been taken. when there wasn't much to go by in the other picture. So it's all about details. And then I said, it's in the little details as well. And so if you can see in this picture, we do have a date on it of 69, which again, it says March, and this particular kid's birthday is not in March. Um, and there's 2 candles on the picture. So this is, I'm going to say this picture is from 1968, not 69, because he was 2 in 1969. But as I mentioned there, I've looked at a lot of candles on cakes and counted them, because if you know the ages of the kid, if you have the like a date of birth for the kids, then you can figure out from, if there's 3 candles on the cake, they were 3. So if they're born in 1960, they were 3 in 61. So there we go. And this is another one with a couple things looking in the background, where the picture is of a little kid wearing a big, huge ski goggles, which would just sort of be where your eye went. But in the background is a TV. You could look up the era for that television, and Walter Cronkite is on the TV. So that will give you again an era time to start placing the photo. And particularly that photo, it may have been hard to tell who the kid was, because they literally had massive ski goggles on. So something else to look at and get a time frame from. There's another picture where it's a picture of somebody sitting in a chair looking at the TV guide. Well, if you zoomed in on the TV guide, you could see the date of the TV guide and get a very close date for that. On the bottom, that's a zoom in of a picture of a calendar on the wall in the background of a photo. And it's clearly 1971, which if you're looking and have no idea, it gives you a little bit more help. So you got to, it's a matter of, and even in the top one where the cake was the easy one to go to, but I could have tried to figure out what kind of pop that was, the pop bottle on the table too, and looked at some of those things too in the backgrounds. uh, there's another one where we could go hairstyles. I've really put myself out here, people. I gotta say that. So that's me, my husband, and one of our best men. And so it's again, it's going to be tough to figure out when that picture was taken by using Google Lens, because again, we're standing on the shore of a cliff somewhere. I have a rough idea where it was. It's somewhere in California, which doesn't really narrow it down much. And I'm not sure when we took that trip, but there's some other things in there that I can find details from. My husband's wearing an Alaska shirt. We bought those shirts on our first trip to Alaska. So that will tell me this was taken after we went to Alaska. I have something on my wrist that looks like a cast or a bandage or something. So if I could go back and figure out where I might have how I might have injured my hand, then that would be another clue. And then again, other things in there. I'm wearing the ever popular zip off pants for travel. And so there's probably a time frame when those came out, of when we started to see those for hiking. Um, and then the hair, what can we say? But yeah.
1980s, I think.
Sorry? Oh,
1980s, mid to late 80s.
80s, or no, actually, that's the 90s. That would be. And then I had to throw this picture in for the Canadians in the group, because our beloved Hudson's Bay has declared bankruptcy, which is apparently now an American company anyway. I didn't know that. They bought it a few years ago. But the Bay is an institution in Canada because it was Hudson Bay explorers who basically founded and built forts all over Canada, and then it evolved into a department store. And this picture, I did not take this picture. I found it on Google. And the reason I took it, my attachment to the Bay, but also I worked at this Bay. In the early 80s. This was one of my fun jobs when I was going to university. But there's lots of clues in this photo that could help me date this picture. And I can figure out where the bay, I already knew where the bay was, but I could blow this picture up and look at the name on the telephone booth. The fact I don't think we have anyone young enough that I need to explain what a telephone booth is here, but this is a blast from the past. But the name on the telephone booth, which I'm looking at the logo without blowing the picture up, I think is Edmonton Telephones. It was purchased and turned into Alberta Government Telephones, or AGT. It is now called TELUS. I can look up when it was still Edmonton Telephones. I've got a bunch of cars in the picture. I've got license plates to look at. The fashion, if I blew it up, was I could probably get a better idea of that. But I'd probably look at that. I could look up when People's Jeweler, like that bay is still there. I could look up when that People's Jewelers was on the corner. I don't even think People's Jewelers exists anymore, but so I look at all the different details because this I got off the internet. I have no idea of the time frame, but I snagged it because I wanted a picture because I never took any pictures when I worked at because you didn't really haul your big camera around back in those days, and you certainly didn't have that little phone camera in your pocket. So we're back to the original picture here. We talked about, oh, I think we got lots of these things done. Seasons I talked about already. And so this is that picture that I showed at the beginning, which is my grandmother's family. And so I think is a good example of things you can search for. And I would go first, I'd look at okay, there's two gentlemen in there in military uniforms. And so we could Google those uniforms and find out what era they are, in fact, First World War uniforms. And that will give us a time frame there. The clothing, if the clothing that the older, I find it interesting, the older girls, because it's my grandmother, grandfather, and then three of the older sisters, and then the two young ones are the two that have the white shirts on. But the ones wearing darker shirts, those styles are somewhat similar with the higher collars. For the one, we can look at that and get some idea. The hairstyles that they have, and again, and the gentleman, the shirt, in the suit, both my grandfather and that uncle have vests on. They have very high small collars, like the very rounded small collars. It looks like they definitely, Grandpa has a pocket watch on. We can count the number of buttons on the suit jacket as another clue for clothing. We could blow up and look at the belt buckle on the little girl in the middle, my Aunt Martha, and see what that was, and it would be quite interesting. The other thing that people have pointed out in this picture is, as most of you, some of you know, some of you may not, but it's not a big secret. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I've had it for 25 years now. And if you look at my grandmother's hands, there is no actual proof that it's genetic, but if you look at my grandmother's hands, that's what my hands would have looked like had I have got my rheumatoid more than 25 years ago before they had such good medication to control the damage done. So it's, um, somebody pointed that out to me one time, and again, my apologies. I need to edit all my old photos. I just haven't got around to it now. I figure this, to me now that I've decided the stories are more important, to get the stories done, and the who, what, where, when is the most important thing, and I can edit anytime. Somebody coming down, like somebody 30 years from now, as long as I tell them who these people are and the stories behind them, then it's they can edit the photo. Like, and they'll buy, as technology improves, you'll just be able to like do a quick click and it'll fix all the big spot on my grandmother's face, and all the little spots and things, and highlight and to get the picture into a better shape. But that's a bunch of ways we can try and date when that picture is. And also where I did some of it by using known facts. I know the date of birth for my grandmother because I have her birth certificate in my genealogy collection of documents. And so I can kind of figure out who's who. I know who the older ones were. I know that her and my Aunt Martha were very close in age. I've also managed to track down that my Uncle Daniel and Uncle Benjamin are the two soldiers, great uncles, and that one of them was killed at Gallipoli, and that was Daniel. And I always, when I saw this picture, for some reason I got in my head that Daniel was the one on the right. But in fact, um, no, Daniel is the one on the right. I always thought the one on the left was Daniel who was killed at Gallipoli, but in fact he is Benjamin, and that is Daniel on the right side, who without the mustache, who was in fact killed at Gallipoli. And Benjamin was taken prisoner several times. He escaped a whole bunch of times and had quite. This was one of my stories in Ponga that had got done. Was the story of my uncle Benjamin, who was a German POW for Apparently, he liked to escape, so he wasn't well treated, and he had something which today we would now call post-traumatic stress after the war, which my grandmother described as he was never quite right after the war, and that would have been Uncle Benjamin. So I think we're done. We're done. I'm going to stop my share.
Wow,
And
Kathy, that's amazing. As always. Whoops. Did we
that was a
lose
quick
Kathy?
overview and tons of clues. And luckily, we record these so you can go back and look at them. But it's fascinating. I've done other things with one of the clients I worked with. They went to a lot of Formula One races, like car races. So there'd be pictures in the background, and it would say Formula One Vancouver, for example, because it's Canadian. And so I could Google when the Formula One race was in Vancouver and get a date that fit with the rest of the picture and get a precise date for when that picture was taken. And I think that's the use of searches and Googling things is so helpful these days. And with the artificial intelligence too, uh, becoming better and better to give us ways to figure out the things in our photos. And like I've looked at um, and looked at things again, like I said, I know in photos I can ask, okay, when did so and so get their braces? And that's something like, and for my own kids, even we were looking at old pictures the other day, and I'm like, my twins are fraternal. They're not identical. And I'm looking at baby pictures going like, sometimes I really can't tell the two of you apart. I have to get a good view. I got to see the noses straight on because my one looks really a lot like my family and has my nose. And the other one is this, just could be the spitting image of his great grandfather. And so we've got some pictures of him as an adult and he just looks just like his grandfather. But looking at little clues and things and gathering all the other information you can is a big help in solving those mysteries and not tossing the photos out.
Yeah.
Because
I, I
sometimes
I have a question exactly on that point, Kathy. As you know, I've been thinking a lot about timelines, and you talked here about building this timeline of all of the collected information. As you compile that information, judging from that photo, it looks as though you just scratch it all down onto a piece of paper, just put it up on the wall. Do you eventually in your process, or would you recommend in your process, turning that into a document in some form? And if so, what form do you use?
we turned it all into a spreadsheet, like
Aha.
Excel, Google Sheets. I think may have done it in Google Sheets, either Excel or Google Sheets, just because I could have lots of columns that I don't have to set up and I could put dates and everything. So we just
You
kind of
have
turned
such
it into a big
you
sheet.
have such a Google sheet still around that you would be comfortable sharing?
I will look that up. Yes.
We
Remind me.
shall talk. We shall talk.
I will share. I'd have to edit out because the one I
Of
have
course.
is my client's information in it. But yes,
Yeah. We can
we
even
did
make
turn
up
that,
stuff.
and then we turn the family tree, because again we were getting back into long ago, and genealogy hadn't really been done on this family, and we were finding things like another tip, um, pictures taken of people's grave sites with information on it, and it would have a birth date and a death date, and then we would add that information to our timeline and also figure out it would be somebody whose name we didn't necessarily have already that would we go, oh, okay, so they're part of the family and they belong here, so we can stick them in on our family tree as well, because the family tree on one side of the family tree had been researched and had gone back quite a way, but the other side of the family, it was pretty slim. And so we did that, and I'm going to convert it to a proper tree for the final product of this project, but which will be the end of my working time, and then I will be all time playing with my own photos. But I'm going to give them a nice family tree made from those big sheets. But it was handy just to have the sheets of paper, because you could scribble stuff out and write stuff on it, and um, just change stuff on the fly without trying to like change a whole document at the time. So we kind of did the documentation on the back end. And somewhere saved in that house, in the house that I worked in there, are all those sheets of paper still with all the photos too.
Mhm.
There's another
Di-
story. There's
Go
another
ahead.
story to be told about how this, that like where we talk about the how did this all come about? How did we end up with this photographic history of the family and going back there? How, what was the, because the process was another story in itself too. So, and what it meant to people. I did some interviews previous with my client about what it was like for her to see these, see pictures that she maybe hadn't seen since she was a child. She's in her 80s now. And so, and what it was like, what memories came back with the, from looking at the pictures. And that's another remarkable piece of what we do is that um, it can be very, it can be very moving and help people remember things too. So
That sounds like a documentary that you're going to do.
could be, yeah. Oh,
So take yourselves off mute. Go ahead, Tyra. Go ahead and ask.
First, thank you. It was great to see you walk through pictures and specifically share those things to think about. And again, it's you never know when a picture can show up that something is in the background that just gives this beautiful clue. So thank you for your presentation overall. I have two quick questions. One, as it relates to the pictures and naming, you mentioned your uncle and you said, I thought it was this uncle on this side, but it really was the other on the other side. What is your feedback or take on digitally adding names to photos so that, when they are shared, they'll be able to easily and quickly identify, who is who, and not just who is in the picture, but where they are in the picture?
yeah. I'm not a fan of writing it. You can digitally, like writing it right on the photo digitally. I don't like that. To me, seems like kind of destroys the art of the photo. But I always, all that information for me goes in the description field of whatever software I'm using. It'll go in the description with the names and actually the left to right of who's who. And then there used to be a program we had that was really easy to do that with. Uh, this is our old, the Ponga program let us do that digitally without putting stuff on top of the photo. We could use the little boxes and identify them in there, but you can write it in the software, but definitely I'm totally for that. I tend to name my photos. I change the names. I don't use, because if you saw the names, all those photos are going to be called scan something and a date and a number on them, which is meaningless because we don't, and I change them to the date as much as I know. That's what I title my photos. So they're titled, so 1960, April 4th, or no, not April, 1960, 04, 28 is the Canadian way we do dates. And also it's the way if you're using any kind of a computer, that's how computers sort. So if you put like the month or the day first and then the year after, they won't sort properly. So I highly recommend that. So it's year, month, day. And I use that as the title of my photo and maybe a description like Kathy's birthday or something, just a short description. And then I add into the, I used to do a lot of tagging and stuff, but now it seems like I don't know that we need that because the search features have gotten so much better. I figure that if I put everything in the description in one place, I don't need to do a whole bunch of name tags and everything else. And with facial recognition and everything, it seems like more work than is necessary. So I'm just trying to write all the information I have in the description of the photo, but I keep the date and a little brief description in the title because some programs, as we know, will strip metadata when they're downloaded. So that's always a tragedy, but that's what I do with the names. You had a second question.
I did. And so, as it relates to when you have pictures maybe that you've inherited, where and people you just don't know who they are, right? They're just unidentified at the time. Do you typically add, and let's say for instance, you have a large family and you're trying to identify the person, so it's not necessarily your immediate family, but a large family. Have you ever added your contact information on the pictures? Like how do you how, or have you, even for your clients when they're trying to figure out who's who, what does that look like? And I just give a little more context. I inherited a number of pictures, and one of my concerns was I didn't want to just send the picture without sending context so that when somebody did get it, if they did know who was in it, it came back to me so that I could make sure that it was updated. So I'm just curious as to if you've ever had to deal with that and what your process is like.
I haven't. I'm lucky. I have a very small family, so for personally, we haven't. And with my large client, we tended to email things to people with the specific people asking them questions about the photo. But you could add that information into one of the there in standard metadata. There should be you should be able to add that information into there's some for an owner or photographer field, but somewhere where you can add a name and contact information.
Got
It's
it. Okay.
fairly standard. I would do that given the situation you're describing.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely was. And I guess going back to the first one, whenever you mentioned doing that also in metadata, right? Putting in the specifics and the names.
Yeah.
What does that look like for your family? And like you said, it's small, but if you had a new client where it is a larger family and they're sharing those pictures, is there a platform that you typically suggest? Because of course, depending on what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't necessarily always see metadata.
Yeah. I have a platform I use. Can I mention it, Barbara? Because we try not to
Yes.
recommend things. I use the
Okay.
platform forever.
You
And
do. Okay, got it.
I
I'm
do
familiar.
because, and
Okay.
it's got way better than when I started using it because we've recently added facial recognition to it, which is just like the joy of my life because I'll be blunt and honest here. I used Photo Mechanic for years, but it doesn't have facial recognition. Just to add the information to my photos, and they were mostly sitting in I'm a PC girl, so they were in my Windows folders. But it didn't have facial recognition, and it was kind of clunky because it wasn't designed for this purpose. So
Got
I
it.
used it for a long time. And then I tried to learn Lightroom, but apparently at this age, I lack the mental capacity to learn Lightroom. I kept forgetting how to do it. And so I forever made my life easier by adding facial recognition, which works really well. And just last week, they gave me back something they had when I first started using them 12 years ago, which is called fuzzy dating, which is where I don't, which a lot of programs you have to put a date. You have to put a day or a year, month, and day. And if you don't know it, it's very frustrating because I don't know it and I don't want to. And in the past, in photo management, we've made up a sort of a standard where if we didn't know, and a lot of programs won't let you put zeros. I started in mine that I labeled I do if I'd only used the year 1900 0000. A lot of programs won't let you put zeros either. But Forever has now gone back to added fuzzy dating to it, and it is just for someone with a ton of old photos, it's just priceless because I can put a decade, I can put a year, I can put a range of years, I can put as much information as I know. I can just put that in the date field and not try and have to then explain, well, if it's the January or if it was in 1990, we used 1990-0101, but how do you differentiate that from New Year's Day of 1990? How do you know if it's a real date or not? So with the fuzzy dating, and there's lots of bulk organizing features, so that's where my stuff is going. So
Thank you. Yeah, it's another nod for forever. I'm familiar with it. So thank you so much.
okay, yeah,
I think across the board, our principles are always to make sure that no matter how fond you are of any given platform, it's wonderful to be able to share what and why you're so fond of it, but also to think about how it is you can be taking your stuff with you.
yeah.
And that exportability and redundancy and all of those good characteristics are things that we can do to ensure that our
We did
precious
Kathy's Corner on that.
archives are protected. Huh?
We did Kathy's Corner on that too. What to look
We
for in
we
platform.
we did indeed. In
Last
fact,
year sometime we did that.
speaking of Kathy's Corner, I was just looking back at last month's episode where you talked about, in addition to things like decal edges and decorative edges, we also had Emily step up and share a photo from her own collection that I then added into the notes. As with each of these, unless you have a concern, I'd be delighted to include those in the follow-ons notes to these and invite people to Thank you very much, Kathy Nielsen. Invite people to share things that we can have a conversation about as good examples following the discussion here.
That would be great. I think we could do a whole Kathy's Corner on looking at people's. Let's have some help. And I've been
We
thinking
just like
about
looking at
the
photos.
that Emily shared, and I'm going to take another look at it because I did a ton of Googling and could not find that ship. And but there are ships from that company, but I couldn't find anything about that in that time frame at all. So I'm starting to wonder now if we're assuming that that picture was taken on that ship, and that it's not just something that it's a picture on a ship as opposed to a picture taken in a room somewhere that had a picture of a ship on a wall. So I've got to go back and look at more details in that picture, and do a little more detective work. But I did some Googling and could not find anything that seemed reasonable about that particular ship. And I've had a lot of success in finding images of the ship my grandparents came on, which we got the name of the ship out of their immigration record from when they landed in Halifax, and it had the ship name. And so I've managed to go back and find pictures of the ship and postcards of I actually purchased some postcards of the ship and things so that I had that actual information. But I'm starting to wonder if we're going down the wrong road there with that picture, Barbara.
Yeah, it's quite possible. Go ahead, Bill.
Have you tried shipindex.com?
Yeah, that may have been one of the ones I looked at.
I was gonna say
It's a weird one because it seems to be there was a military ship with that name that sunk, so obviously not that ship. But it also seems to be a common name for commercial shipping. And the picture looks like it was indeed like a passenger ship, a fairly fancy one. But I got to dig more, Bill. But if you put that link can you type that in the chat and then we'll have it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I will check that one because I now have a mystery to solve. So
that was the Electra, and
Electra.
Bill, you're going to drop in there the name of your ship index, and then of course finding your ship manifests as to who landed where, when, of what we know. So as we wrap this up, I want to thank everybody once again for your rapt attention. And really, I think it's the first one to invite folks to follow this on. You can't drop photos into comments in Substack. You can include them in notes when you, for example, share the notes from today's recording. You can include a photo of your own if you'd like, or just DM it to Kathy. Please, if you would like, if you are okay with us sharing, please explicitly say so. Otherwise, we will assume not. Just sort of good manners. And any last comments or questions before I wrap? Okay, then thank you, everyone.
As looking for that unmute button, I knew it. Did you have a comment, Anne?
No, I was just going to say thank you very much. Really interesting. That was all.
Yeah, thank you. It was great.
Yeah, these are always fun.
Well, I could go on, like I could go through we could look at all my pictures that I still have to work on, Bill. We could be here for days.
I've got a tub of them sitting here under my desk.
That's the ones.
That's one thing we all have in common.
Yeah,
that's what makes it fun.
It's fascinating. I enjoy immensely, as you can tell, talking about it, but also searching for the information. Just you can go down a lot of rabbit holes, but it's still very fascinating what you can find. So thanks for coming.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.